When an avoidant misses you, their body doesn't lean in, it braces. For an avoidant, missing you doesn't arrive gently or romantically. It doesn't feel like yearning, warmth, or emotional pull. It hits the body first, not the heart. A tightening in the chest, a subtle agitation, an urge to stay busy or regain control. The sensation is unsettling because it isn't recognized as love, it's registered as risk. Longing requires emotional openness. And emotional openness once came with consequences they had no power over. So when missing you surfaces, the nervous system reacts the same way it would to danger. It contracts, hardens, prepares to defend. Instead of thinking about closeness or reunion, the avoidant mind shifts into management mode, scanning for ways to neutralize the feeling before it grows teeth. What most people don't realize is that for avoidance, missing someone equals emotional dependency, and dependency equals vulnerability. And vulnerability in their early emotional blueprint wasn't met with safety. It was met with overwhelm, intrusion, rejection, or abandonment. So the body learned to equate need with loss of self. That's why missing you doesn't feel like love blooming. It feels like something is going wrong internally, something that needs to be corrected, something that threatens autonomy. The thought isn't, I wish I could hold you. It's, why is this affecting me? Followed by an urgent need to shut the sensation down. This is where the confusion begins for the person on the other side. You might expect missing to soften someone, to make them reach out, to pull them closer. But for an avoidant, missing you triggers the opposite response. The closer they feel emotionally, the more their system demands distance. So instead of leaning into the feeling, they create space from it. They distract themselves, overwork, socialize without depth, consume content, intellectualize the connection, or mentally rewrite the story of the relationship. Not because the bond didn't matter, but because it mattered too much to feel safely. The avoidant nervous system is wired to survive emotional intensity, not to savor it. So when missing you stirs intensity, the body interprets it as a threat to equilibrium. This is why avoidants often appear cold or indifferent, right when emotions are strongest. What looks like detachment is actually containment. They're not ignoring the feeling. They're holding it down, compressing it, keeping it from spilling into action. Reaching out would require acknowledging need. Acknowledging need would mean admitting dependence, and dependence feels like losing control. This internal struggle creates a painful contradiction. On one level, the avoidant feels your absence. On another, they feel endangered by how much it affects them. So the mind steps in to protect the system. It reframes missing as weakness. It minimizes the connection. It highlights your flaws, the incompatibilities, the reasons distance is healthier. These thoughts aren't always true. They're regulatory. They exist to dampen the emotional signal so the body can calm down again. Missing you doesn't disappear. It gets buried under rationalization and restraint. That's why avoidants often don't grieve the way others do. Their grief isn't visible. It doesn't cry or reach or ache outwardly. It tightens inward. It becomes rigidity, silence, self-control. The sadness is there, but it's locked behind a protective wall built long before you ever entered their life. And from the outside, it can look like you were never important at all. But the truth is more uncomfortable. You were important enough to activate their deepest defenses. So when an avoidant goes quiet instead of closer, when they seem distant instead of longing, it isn't because they don't miss you. It's because missing you feels like standing too close to something that once burned them. Their system doesn't ask how to reconnect. It asks how to survive the feeling. And until missing no longer feels like a threat, they will choose control over closeness every time. Avoidants don't miss you in chaos. They miss you in silence. For an avoidant, missing you doesn't surface during moments of loneliness, heartbreak, or emotional collapse. Those states activate defense, not reflection. When emotions spike, the avoidant nervous system goes into containment mode. Suppress, stabilize, survive. In those moments, there is no space to feel you. Longing requires openness, and openness is the very thing their system is trying to avoid. So when things feel heavy or painful, they don't miss you more. They feel less. Emotional shutdown becomes the priority. This is why looking for signs of missing during obvious distress often leads to the wrong conclusion. You're watching the wrong moments. Avoidants think about you most when life is quiet, when nothing is demanded of them emotionally, when there's no pressure to respond, no expectation to perform intimacy, no risk of being pulled into closeness. It's during neutral, regulated states, driving alone, lying awake at night, sitting in silence, doing something routine, that thoughts of you slip through. Not because they're suddenly overwhelmed with emotion, but because their nervous system finally feels safe enough to allow attachment memories to surface without panic. This is a crucial distinction most people miss. Avoidants don't associate missing with pain the way anxious types do. Pain triggers defenses, calm allows access. So the absence of visible sadness doesn't mean absence of attachment. It often means the attachment is being stored until the system can tolerate it. When the world slows down and there's no emotional threat, your presence reappears quietly, a memory, a phrase you used, the way a moment felt. These thoughts don't announce themselves as longing. They don't come with tears. They arrive subtly, almost impersonally, which is why avoidants often dismiss them as random or meaningless. Internally, the avoidant doesn't say, "I miss them." They say, "That's strange. Why did I think of that?" The mind minimizes because naming the feeling would give it weight, and weight feels dangerous. So instead of following the thought, they let it pass. They don't reach out. They don't sit with it. They don't allow it to deepen. They return neutrality as quickly as possible because neutrality feels safe. This pattern creates the illusion that avoidants don't reflect, don't reminisce, don't emotionally process. In reality, they do, just not in emotionally charged states. Their processing happens in low-intensity windows. And because those windows don't look dramatic, they're often invisible to others. You might assume they've moved on because they aren't visibly affected, but internally, you resurface when nothing is demanding their emotional attention, when there's no risk of being pulled back into vulnerability. This is also why avoidance can seem unaffected immediately after separation, only to feel the connection later. Right after distance is created, the nervous system relaxes. The threat of closeness disappears, safety returns, and with safety comes access to attachment memory. That's when missing quietly grows, not as pain, but as awareness. Awareness of what existed, awareness of what felt regulating, grounding, or meaningful. But because this awareness isn't paired with emotional urgency, it doesn't automatically lead to action. To an avoidant, missing without urgency feels manageable. Acting on it does not. Reaching out would reintroduce emotional risk, expectations, and closeness. So they keep the feeling internal, controlled, muted. They may think about you without ever admitting it. Even to themselves, they may carry a sense of you without labeling it loss. And from the outside, it looks like indifference. But the truth is quieter and more complex. Avoidants don't miss loudly. They miss privately, in moments when no one is watching, when nothing is required, when their nervous system is calm enough to remember without fear. And unless safety and regulation align with the possibility of connection, that missing will stay exactly where it is felt, unspoken and unseen. The moment an avoidant feels emotionally closer to you, their mind starts creating distance. When an avoidant begins to miss you, the first withdrawal doesn't happen in their behavior. It happens inside their mind. Before silence shows up externally, before distance becomes visible, there is an internal retreat that most people never see. The feeling of missing creates emotional proximity, and emotional proximity triggers alarm. Their nervous system reads closeness as loss of autonomy, so it responds by pulling back internally to restore balance. This is why avoidance can seem suddenly colder, more detached, or less emotionally available at the exact moment the bond feels strongest. The missing activates connection, and the system rushes to neutralize it. Internally, this looks like subtle but powerful shifts in perception. The avoidant mind starts scanning for flaws, incompatibilities, or reasons the connection wouldn't work long-term. Moments that once felt meaningful get reframed as insignificant. Emotional depth gets reinterpreted as pressure. This isn't deliberate sabotage, it's regulation. Their brain is trying to reduce emotional intensity to a tolerable level. Missing you creates too much emotional weight, so the mind lightens the load by shrinking the bond in their own narrative. This is where many partners get confused and hurt. From the outside, it looks like emotional whiplash. One moment there's closeness, warmth, even vulnerability, and then suddenly there's distance, hesitation, or emotional shutdown. It feels personal, as if you've done something wrong. But what's actually happening is internal boundary setting. The avoidant isn't reacting to you, they're reacting to what they feel toward you, and that feeling is what scares them. Avoidance learned early that relying on others came with a cost. So when missing you awakens dependency, even in small amounts, their system responds by reclaiming independence internally. They detach emotionally before they detach physically. They start imagining life without you, not because they want to lose you, but because imagining separation soothes the nervous system. It restores a sense of self-containment. Distance becomes a form of self-regulation. This internal pullback often goes unnoticed because it doesn't involve conflict or explanation. Avoidants don't announce it. They don't process it out loud. They simply shift. Their tone changes. Their emotional availability narrows. They become harder to read. And because the detachment is happening internally first, it can feel sudden and confusing to the other person. One day the connection feels present. The next, it feels like it's evaporating. What makes this even more painful is that the avoidant may still care deeply during this phase. Missing hasn't disappeared. It's just been compartmentalized. They still think about you, they still feel the bond, but they've placed emotional distance between themselves and the feeling to stay regulated. They may convince themselves they're over it or fine because the intensity has been reduced. But reduction isn't resolution, it's suppression. This pattern also explains why avoidants can walk away while still emotionally attached. The decision to distance doesn't come from absence of feeling. It comes from too much of it. When missing you becomes persistent, when the bond feels like it's gaining momentum, the avoidance system prioritizes safety over connection. And safety to them means emotional space. So if you've ever felt someone pulling away right when things felt meaningful, it wasn't because the connection lacked depth. It was because it had reached a depth their system didn't know how to sustain. Missing you didn't inspire pursuit. It triggered retreat, not out of indifference, but out of self-preservation. An avoidant can feel the ache of your absence, and still no reunion would destabilize them. One of the hardest truths to accept about avoidant attachment is that missing someone does not automatically translate into wanting them back. For avoidance, missing you is an emotional experience, not a decision, not a plan, and not a promise. They can feel the quiet ache of your absence, think about you in fleeting moments, and still understand that reconnecting would pull them back into a state their nervous system associates with threat. This contradiction feels cruel to the person on the receiving end, but internally it makes perfect sense. Missing is tolerable. Closeness is not. Avoidance separate feeling from action more than any other attachment style. Feeling is internal and controllable. Action requires vulnerability, communication, and the risk of emotional exposure. So while they may genuinely miss the way you made them feel grounded, understood, or emotionally alive, they also remember how dysregulated closeness felt in their body. The anxiety, the pressure, the sense of being needed. Wanting you back would mean re-entering that state, and their system has already decided that state is unsafe. This is why avoidants often maintain distance even when attachment is still alive. From the outside, it looks like emotional detachment or indifference, but internally it's a calculation based on nervous system memory, not logic or romance. They aren't asking themselves, do I miss them? They're asking, can I survive being that close again? And often the answer is no, not because you weren't important, but because importance itself became overwhelming. Missing you becomes something they hold privately. They may replay moments, remember specific details, or feel a soft sense of loss that never quite turns into grief. But they also feel relief in the absence of expectation. No one is asking for emotional availability. No one is pulling on their inner world. That relief reinforces the decision to stay away. The nervous system learns distance equals peace, and peace will always win over longing. This dynamic explains why avoidance can seem emotionally inconsistent. They might check your social media, ask about you through mutual connections, or speak of you with quiet fondness, yet never make a move toward reconnection. These behaviors aren't mixed signals. They're expressions of internal attachment without external risk. They allow the avoidant to feel without engaging, to remember without committing, to miss without surrendering control. There's also a deeper fear at play, the fear that wanting you back would mean admitting they need you. A need for an avoidant is not romantic. It's dangerous. It implies dependency, loss of autonomy, and the possibility of being engulfed or abandoned. So even if they miss you, they won't frame it as desire for reunion. They frame it as nostalgia, as appreciation, as something that belonged to the past. This is where many people get stuck, waiting for missing to turn into action. But for avoidance, missing doesn't naturally lead forward. It loops inward. It gets processed quietly, intellectually, at a distance. And unless the avoidant has done deep work to rewire their relationship with vulnerability, missing you will stay exactly where it is felt, acknowledged internally, and contained. Understanding this doesn't make it hurt less, but it does make it clearer. If an avoidant doesn't come back, it isn't because they didn't feel your absence. It's because returning would require them to face a level of emotional exposure they don't yet know how to hold. And until closeness feels safer than distance, missing you will never be enough. If they seem annoyed instead of heartbroken, that's not indifference. It's regulation. When avoidants miss someone, the emotion rarely comes out as visible sadness or longing. Sadness requires surrender. Longing requires openness. Both ask the nervous system to soften, and for an avoidant, softness feels unsafe. So instead, missing gets translated into irritation, restlessness, or emotional numbness. This is one of the most misunderstood expressions of avoidant attachment. From the outside, it looks like coldness, annoyance, or even resentment. But internally, it's the system trying to manage an emotion it doesn't know how to hold. Missing you disrupts the avoidance sense of internal balance. It creates emotional noise where there was control, and rather than allowing that noise to become vulnerability, the nervous system redirects it into something more manageable: irritation. Irritation keeps boundaries intact. It preserves a sense of autonomy. It creates emotional distance without the risk of collapse. So instead of feeling sad that you're gone, they feel bothered that the thought of you still exists. This is why reminders of you can trigger unexpected reactions. A song, a place, a memory, instead of softening them, it tightens them. They might feel impatient, frustrated, or suddenly compelled to change the subject or distract themselves. The irritation isn't about you doing something wrong. It's about the emotional charge you carry. Your presence, even in memory, challenges the avoidance emotional containment. Avoidants often don't recognize this irritation as missing. To them, missing should look like pain, longing, or desire to reconnect, things they don't consciously feel. So they interpret the irritation as proof they're over it, or that the relationship was draining. The mind steps in to make sense of the bodily reaction, and the easiest explanation is detachment. But what's actually happening is suppression. The sadness is there. It's just been rerouted. This emotional rerouting is a learned survival strategy. Many avoidants grew up in environments where expressing sadness or need led to dismissal, overwhelm, or punishment. So the system learned to convert vulnerable emotions into self-protective ones. Anger, irritation, and numbness are safer than grief. They require less dependence on others. They maintain control, and control is the avoidant's primary currency of safety. This is also why avoidants can seem harsher in their internal dialogue after separation. They may focus on what annoyed them about the relationship, what felt demanding, what didn't work. These thoughts aren't objective truths. They're emotional armor. By staying in irritation, they avoid dropping into the sadness underneath, and as long as they don't feel the sadness, they don't have to confront the depth of attachment. From the outside, this can feel invalidating. You may wonder how someone who once cared so deeply can seem so unaffected or even annoyed by your absence. But the irritation isn't a lack of feeling, it's a sign that feeling is present and being actively managed. Missing you destabilizes them, so their system tightens instead of softening. Over time, if safety increases and emotional pressure decreases, the irritation may fade, allowing softer emotions to surface. But until then, the avoidant will stay in a state that feels controllable. They would rather feel slightly irritated than deeply vulnerable. And unless you understand this translation, it's easy to mistake regulation for rejection. So when an avoidant seems annoyed rather than heartbroken, don't assume you didn't matter. Assume the opposite. You mattered enough to disrupt their emotional equilibrium, and their system responded the only way it knows how. Avoidants don't miss you at the height of connection. They miss you once the danger has passed. For an avoidant, missing doesn't peak during intimacy or even immediately after separation. In those moments, the nervous system is still activated, still bracing, still protecting emotional closeness. Even when desired creates internal pressure, and pressure demands defense, not reflection. So when the connection is active or right after it ends, the avoidance system is focused on relief and stabilization. The goal is to return to baseline. Only once safety is restored does missing quietly emerge. Distance is not empty for an avoidant. It's calming. When emotional expectations drop, the body relaxes. The constant vigilance around closeness fades. There is no one to respond to, no emotional role to play, no risk of being pulled into vulnerability. This relief is often misinterpreted by others as moving on quickly. But relief and detachment are not the same thing. Relief simply means the nervous system is no longer under threat. And paradoxically, that's when the heart gains access to attachment memory. Once the avoidant feels safe again, emotionally neutral, self-contained, regulated thoughts of you start to appear. Not dramatically, not painfully, just quietly. They remember how it felt to talk to you, to share space, to be understood without explanation. These memories surface without panic because there is no longer an expectation to act on them. Safety allows remembrance. Safety allows missing. This delayed emotional response is one of the most confusing aspects of avoidant attachment. You might expect missing to motivate action right away, but for avoidance, action requires vulnerability, and vulnerability doesn't feel safe yet. So the missing stays internal. It becomes a background awareness rather than an emotional emergency. They feel the absence without feeling compelled to fix it. This also explains why avoidants sometimes reach out much later, weeks, months, even years after separation. By that time, the emotional threat has faded. The nervous system no longer associates you with immediate closeness or pressure. And in that lowered risk state, the missing feels manageable enough to acknowledge, not always to reconnect deeply, but to make contact. The timing isn't about you, it's about regulation. However, even in this phase, missing doesn't necessarily lead to reunion. Feeling safe is not the same as feeling ready. Avoidance can miss you intensely in the absence of emotional demands, yet still know that sustained closeness would re-trigger the same defenses. So they may hover at a distance, thinking, remembering, even checking in, without fully returning. This is why no contact often seems to affect avoidance differently. The removal of pressure gives their system room to breathe. And in that space, the attachment that was previously suppressed can surface, but it surfaces slowly, cautiously, and without urgency. The avoidant doesn't experience missing as a crisis. They experience it as a realization. From the outside, this can feel unfair. You may have grieved intensely while they seemed fine, only to sense them reappearing emotionally when you've already done the work of letting go. But this delay isn't manipulation. It's physiology. The avoidant system processes attachment on a different timeline, one that prioritizes safety before feeling. So if an avoidant seems to miss you more once distance is established, it doesn't mean the connection was weak. It means closeness was overwhelming. They needed safety first, and only in safety could the truth of attachment quietly return. Avoidants don't confess emotions in the moment, they confess them once they're already safe from them. When an avoidant finally says, "I did miss you," it rarely happens at the height of emotion. It happens after the wave has passed, after the nervous system has settled, after the feeling has been processed privately and contained. Avoidants don't speak from inside emotional intensity. they speak from distance. This delay can feel invalidating or even dishonest to the person hearing it, but it's actually the only way their system knows how to be truthful without becoming overwhelmed. For avoidance, naming an emotion is not neutral. To say, I miss you, is to acknowledge need, attachment, and vulnerability all at once. And vulnerability is only tolerable when the emotional charge has been reduced. So they wait, they sit with the feeling silently, they regulate, they detach just enough to make the emotion feel manageable. Only then do words become possible. This is why avoidants often sound understated or flat when they finally admit missing you. The emotion you're hearing is not current, it's retrospective. You're receiving the echo, not the peak. And because it's no longer urgent or raw, it can feel confusing. You might wonder why they didn't say it when it mattered most, but for them, saying it earlier would have felt like losing control. Avoidants are wired to prioritize emotional containment over emotional expression. In their internal hierarchy, feeling comes first, then regulation, then, if safety allows, communication. Many people expect communication to happen alongside feeling. Avoidants expect it to happen after. This difference in timing creates deep misunderstandings. You may assume silence means absence of emotion. In reality, silence often means the emotion was too present to speak. By the time an avoidant admits missing you, they've already resolved the internal conflict. They've already decided how close they're willing to get, if at all. The admission is not an invitation, it's a disclosure. It's information, not a bid for connection. And that distinction matters. Saying, I missed you doesn't necessarily mean I want to be with you again. It means I can now acknowledge what I felt without destabilizing myself. This pattern also explains why avoidants often express emotions in the past tense. I did care, I was affected, I missed you. The past tense creates distance. It keeps the feeling contained in time. Present tense would require presence, and presence would require vulnerability. For the person on the receiving end, this can reopen wounds. You might hear the truth you needed, but too late, and that timing hurts. But it's important to understand that avoidants don't delay because they want to withhold. They delay because their system won't allow expression until the threat has passed. So if an avoidant ever admits missing you, take it for what it is. Evidence that the attachment was real, not proof that reconciliation is coming. The confession arrives only once the feeling no longer feels dangerous. And by then, the relationship has often already been decided. This doesn't mean avoidants are incapable of love. It means their love moves through safety first, expression second. And unless emotional vulnerability becomes safer than silence, their truth will always arrive late, filtered, regulated, and finally speakable.